My name is John Weingart. I'm the Associate Director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a talk by Dr. Arthur Caplan, who is one of the country's leading public intellectuals and public educators in the field of medical ethics. Dr. Caplan is here tonight as the featured speaker for the Arthur J. Holland Ethics in Government program, which is centered at the Eagleton Institute. Before I introduce our guest, I want to tell you a little about the man for whom this annual event is named. You will find some of this information in the program you may have found on your seat when you sat down. Arthur Holland was the mayor of the city of Trenton, New Jersey's state capital, for almost 30 years. First elected in 1959, he became well known for his openness to the public and the ethical standards of his administration. His national reputation was such that his colleagues chose him to serve as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Holland was a Rutgers graduate in the class of 1954 and a graduate student here as well. In 1989, shortly after his death, Rutgers established this program to remember Mayor Holland and to help build from his legacy. Consistent with his life and with the mission of the Eagleton Institute of Politics, the Holland Program on Ethics in Government seeks to promote integrity in public affairs and to improve public policy and government practices by seeking ways to replace cynicism and apathy with awareness, understanding, and action. For the Eagleton Institute, overseeing the Holland program has special resonance because two members of the family are graduates of the Eagleton Fellowship program. Archwife Betty Holland was in the first class of Eagleton Fellows in 1958, and their son Matt was an Eagleton Fellow in 1994. I want to tell you just one story about Mayor Holland that I've learned from his children. When they were young, they were huge baseball fans, and living in Trenton, they were Phillies fans. Over dinner one night, their dad told them that he had been given free season passes to the Phillies and that he turned them down. The sons were upset and disappointed and couldn't believe it. And their father then asked the sons and said, well, if I wasn't mayor, would they have offered the tickets to me? And once the kids said the answer was no, he told them that that was all he needed to know to be certain that he should not accept them. The Arthur J. Holland program seeks to develop ethics in government. It's a phrase which can mean different things to different people. It's a phrase which can be defined in many different ways. We mean it as men and women in government making decisions because they believe the policy and actions they choose are for the greater good, not because of any personal gain or advantage they and their associates might receive. Tonight, Dr. Caplan will explore the ethical considerations that should guide government officials as they address current complex and challenging medical and healthcare issues. From the implementation of the Affordable Care Act to the Ebola epidemic to the question of whether vaccination should be required for all children, the intersections of these themes of medicine, health, government, and ethics have rarely been more prominent. Arthur Caplan is a professor of bioethics and director of the Division of Medical Ethics at New York University, after holding similar posts at the University of Pennsylvania for many years. A sense of Dr. Caplan's influence may be apparent from just a sampling of the national and international organization committees on which he has served in organizations such as the National Cancer Institute, the United Nations, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the National Institutes of Mental Health, the Franklin Institute, the American Association of University Professors, and currently he is an ethics advisor to an agency within the U.S. Department of Defense. In his spare time, he has been the author or editor of 32 books and more than 600 articles. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Arthur Caplan.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very appreciative that the Holland family has created this opportunity, and the Eagleton Institute saw fit to invite me to come. Very grateful that so many of you came out on a pretty rotten night in terms of winter, which I basically came east from Minnesota, having lived there for a long time, to get the hell away from this. It seems to be chasing me wherever I go. Poor old winter. Well, you know, there are a lot of things that I can talk about where government intersects medicine and policy issues get created that require ethical resolution. The one I picked to talk about tonight, I think, is one that will, whatever your views about science, whatever your views about politics, I think it'll be very engaging for you, and it's a very, very tough set of issues. It falls under the label of compassionate use. Compassionate use is a situation where somebody who's very sick needs a drug, needs a vaccine, might need stem cells, might need a medical device that is not yet approved by the Food and Drug Administration. You will see these situations often in the media. People build websites and they say, I have a child who's dying and I need something to help them. Or I myself am ill and I can't wait until a particular study is done and the drug gets approved. I'm going to be dead before that happens. What can you do for me? That falls under the description compassionate use. It is something that has been around for a long time. Some people who are as old as I am know that it was certainly around during the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 80s, with people saying, can you help us? There was a movie made, some of you may have seen, the Dallas Buyers Club, which was really about compassionate use, although I'm sorry to tell you I don't think it was accurately about compassionate use, because it gave you the idea that just across the border in Mexico was something that could cure everybody if we could only get there, and I don't think there was anything that was across the border in Mexico that was going to cure anybody. But the problem, the challenge was true in the movie, trying to help people who had a disease at that time for which there was nothing. And what were we going to do? And why would we stand in anybody's way who wanted to try anything? You're going to die. Why wouldn't we let you try something? Anything, whatever it is. Parallel to those challenges in this country, compassionate use became a big issue more recently in ways that was going on around you, but you may not have been alert to, and that is in the Ebola epidemic. The Ebola epidemic, think about it. Do you remember situations? We had a patient at Bellevue, NYU, who had Ebola. Craig Spencer, you remember his case was here. You had Casey Hickox, who was locked up not far from here in a weird plastic tent, and then ran away. And she ran away saying, I won't be quarantined, but some of you know she ran away to Fort Kent, Maine, which has no people. So de facto she was quarantined. She self-quarantined herself in northern Maine. But I digress. The point of the Ebola epidemic situation was, remember people saying, we're going to try blood transfusions from people who survived and give it to people who are infected. That's compassionate use. That was never tested. It's not an approved therapy. Nobody would pay for it from an insurance company. Antiviral drugs. One called brincinofovir, which you're going to hear a lot about in a few minutes. That was given to many people from Western countries who made it back here as a kind of emergency intervention. It's an antiviral drug. Ebola is a virus. That's compassionate use. Trying out any new drug, any kind of blood serum transfusion, compassionate use became a big issue in the Ebola epidemic. It became a big issue in a different way. Many people in African countries, West African countries, began to say, why aren't we getting these things? You're giving them to Western healthcare workers, but I don't see anybody in Liberia getting anything. So what's going on here? So access to compassionate use, who gets it? How does that work? If anybody should, is a very, very tough problem that government has to deal with, sometimes in the context of local government, sometimes in the context of the federal government, sometimes in the context of international governments. Let me give you one other brief preliminary set of remarks, so just everybody's up to speed on this. So if you go to the drugstore and get a prescription filled for a medicine, you presume that the medicine is what? Safe and effective. So how do we know that? And why do we believe that whatever these medicines are that we get prescribed for us are safe and effective. Well, going back to scandals involving quack medicine that poison people, going back to drugs that caused terrible birth defects when they were given prior to the FDA, going back to many, many instances where people were poisoned by drugs that were improperly made and contained impure substances or weren't manufactured the way they were supposed to be, we decided to build a system in this country that the whole world follows, basically. And that system is one of drug approval, and it works like this. Every drug has to be tested in animals first. Those of you interested in animal rights and in animal experimentation, it is the law that you must begin drug studies with animals. And indeed, until relatively recently, you had to give animals drugs in doses that killed 50% of them to know what the lethal dose was. So we deliberately set out standards that would result in animal deaths. We're moving away from that a little bit more recently, trying to do more cell studies and alternative things. But the general idea was test in animals first. Now, animal testing is helpful, but as we learned from that birth defect situation involving thalidomide, you can't always tell from animals what's going to be safe in people, and you can't actually always tell in animals what's going to be effective. The good news if you're a mouse is we can cure a lot of your cancer. That doesn't work in people. We don't actually understand completely why. But we do animal testing, and then we move to what's called a phase 1 test. If it looks good in animals, we will expose humans. There's always a first human to get a drug. Sometimes they're volunteers, just healthy people that we go out and pay. We also refer to them as Rutgers students. It's true, a lot of medical testing on students. There are other people who make a living at it. There are people who sign up for experiment after experiment, and that's how they make their living. I met a number of those people in my day. And then sometimes we have to test it on somebody who's sick because it's specifically for a disease, and you wouldn't see anything if you didn't try to treat a person who's got the disease. So there are two kinds of first-in-human studies: healthy volunteers looking for side effects and sick people looking for side effects. So we do that, and that, while we talk about that as safety, that actually usually involves no more than 20 to 30 people. They're very small trials to establish what the toxicity is of something. Happily, relatively few people die in those studies, but a few do, because some drugs are so nasty, even though they were okay in animals, that they surprise the researchers and somebody dies. We've had deaths in phase 1 studies. We had a famous one years ago at Penn when I was there, involving a young man named Jesse Gelsinger, who died in the first gene therapy experiment. He was 19. If the drug doesn't show bad side effects, you then move on to phase 2, the second step, animals, phase 1 safety, phase 2 doses, to see whether you get a biological effect that you're desiring. All that means is you give a big dose to the first group of people, hopefully in an escalating sequence. You don't kill them all with a huge dose to begin with, but you're trying to dose up. The second step is to give a moderate dose and see if it does anything beneficial, not to keep you alive. Did it make the tumor shrink a little bit? Did you see some biochemical change that might indicate that the MS is likely to be a little bit better? Did you see some change in the chemistry of the person so that if they had schizophrenia, maybe something would be beneficial, but you're just looking for tiny biological markers? Those studies usually involve about 50 to 100 people. If you get through that, you move to phase 3, the third step, and that is the clinical trial that you all hear about, which is we're going to give half the people the dose that we figured out from the first 2 steps, and now we're going to try and see if it has any effect on the disease. Those are sometimes called placebo-controlled trials because half the people in them may get nothing. Sometimes the drug that's new is going to be tested against the existing drug, but you kind of have the hope that the new drug is better. If you're testing a new drug against an existing drug, it's harder to tell whether there is real benefit, because you have to give it to more people, because the existing drug probably does a little bit of good, and if you want to find out whether it does more good, you got to study it longer. So the trials involving existing drugs against so-called hopefully better drugs are longer and involve more people. But a clinical trial might involve 1,000 people for a drug. A clinical trial of a vaccine might involve 10 or 20,000 people, because you're going to give it to a lot of people. So, in any event, these are the steps, and there's actually a fourth step, phase 4, which is studying what happens to the drug out in the world. Hopefully, if bad things happen when a drug gets out in the world, the doctor will call the FDA and say there's a problem. Anybody think of a drug that happened with recently? Vioxx. So Vioxx went all the way through the 3 steps, looked good, and then it turned out to cause heart attacks in some people over 65 and got pulled, but that was after it was out and available. So you do try to do surveillance on drugs once they're marketed, but it's a little haphazard because that requires people to call in, and it requires them to recognize that this guy had a problem, not because he's over 65, but because the drug caused something. It wasn't just some underlying illness. So difficult sometimes to figure out what's going on with drugs and vaccines and so on once they really get out there. It's just hard. It's just a hard thing to determine. Compassionate use, having given you those steps, animals, safety, dose, efficacy, that's the third one, is about what's going on with animal drugs and phase 1. Because people can't live long enough sometimes. That clinical trial with 1,000 people, it might take 2 years. It might take 3 years to recruit enough people in. Depending on how rare your disease is, it might take 10 years to recruit enough people in. And if your child is dying of Tay-Sachs, and somebody says, or sickle cell is giving them a lot of trouble, and says, well, just wait 5 years. We'll get the answer from this study. You're sort of like, I don't have 5 years. I don't have 5 months. There's going to be damage that no one can fix if we don't do something, so give me it now. What's the alternative? Complete mental retardation? Death? Why would I want to wait? I'll put my child in, or I'll put myself in. I have a giant brain tumor. I'm dying of Parkinsonism. I have Alzheimer's. I can see my mind going. I don't want to wait for the trial. I would like to get something right now. Ebola patients. The death rate in Africa is 80%. You want to wait for the trial? Trial of Ebola drugs is going to take years. By the time you get the answer, everybody's going to be dead and the epidemic will be over. So what are we going to do? On the other hand, if everybody says, hey, I don't want to wait, I'd like to get compassionate use, then who's going to be in the trials? How are we ever going to show that anything works? We don't know what's going on. So the big tension from a public policy point of view is you have people in the here and now, often with very serious illnesses, fatal illnesses, terminal illnesses, and they want something. Some of them are children. You're going to see one in a minute. And then there's the patients yet to come. They're not here yet. But they would like drugs that are safe and effective. And the only way they're going to get them is if we take this thing through the animals, and the safety study, and the dose study, and the efficacy study. And if you don't do that, you're constantly scratching your head saying, I don't know whether this really works. I guess some of them got a little better. I don't know. Would they have gotten better anyway? I don't know. Not everybody with Ebola died. Actually, people who came here and got hydration and electrolyte balance and bleeding management lived. I'm not sure what role those medicines played. Maybe it was just getting rehydrated, which we could do, and it's hard to do in Africa, given the poor state of hospitals there. So what made the difference? We don't know. Next epidemic, you're going to give out the drugs, you're going to try new vaccines, you're back where you were, if you don't test, before the whole thing started. So everybody get the tension here? It's like, on the one hand, I want it for me. On the other hand, for the future patients, for your grandchildren, you don't want to give them drugs that you didn't test. You don't want to give them drugs that you don't know if they work. And I might add, you certainly don't want to give them drugs that cost $100,000 a pop. The prices of drugs are going up. How many of you have heard of precision medicine? And how many of you have seen advertisements as you drive around town that say, come to UMDNJ because we have personalized medicine, we have individualized treatment just for you. You seen that? Well, if there's treatment just for you, then who are you going to test it on to see if it works? If there's only a few people who have your genotype, how are you going to run a study that's big enough to be statistically accurate as to say this is safe? So the more medicine gets precise, even though it makes for good advertising, after all, who wouldn't want a individualized medicine made for me? That sounds good. The harder it is to show that it's safe and effective, because there aren't so many of you. It's a smaller set for people like you. So the more medicine becomes individualized, the harder it is to do this historic pattern of testing. So we're going to take a look at the dilemma, some of the answers that have been proposed to it. I won't keep you in suspense. I think most of the government answers so far stink. That's a very technical, ethical term. And maybe we'll get to some idea about what might be done differently or better, and then we can look at the Ebola situation if there's time, or we can get into that in questions. So that little guy is Josh Hardy. Josh Hardy was in the news all last summer. Some of you may remember him, but as social media goes and the media, people forget we're on to the next crisis. I was just saying when we came in here, I can't even remember anymore who the latest person is who lied about their experience as a media person. They're happening like one a day now. It's sort of like, oh, okay. Was that the guy who was in Argentina who got his helicopter shot down, who was in special anyway. Well, he's one of a parade. Yeah, sure. You pick on him because you don't like that guy. But the VA secretary was out today walking back some comments that he had served in special forces. Did you see that one? Yeah. I thought, by the way, just as an aside, that was okay to do, but you sort of had to stop doing it in high school because there weren't any more girls to impress. I mean, I scored any number of touchdowns on my high school football team that I probably didn't, but that's for another talk. So this kid, great kid, a lot of energy, but unfortunately he has a very, very rare form of kidney cancer. At 9 months, he was diagnosed with this very rare aggressive kidney cancer. Aggressive here means it gets in your kidney, it kills your kidney, and then it spreads. So it's bad news for a lot of reasons. He underwent radiation and chemo, and he actually, that stem cell transplant is a bone marrow transplant using stem cells. And that was done when he was pretty young, and he remained cancer-free for 4 years. So that was a very good outcome. However, in 2013, he was diagnosed with a precancerous bone marrow disorder. Something had become cancerous in his bone marrow that had been transplanted into him. That wasn't his initial problem, but now he had a second problem. And he had to get all that bone marrow taken out, killed by radiation, and then replaced with another bone marrow transplant. So he wound up, this was him, and this is him. So he went through hell, but even worse, after he goes through the bone marrow transplant in early 2014, he wound up at the intensive care unit at St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Those of you who go to the movies, that's the one that is Danny Thomas, and they do the collections. Remember St. Jude's? So that's where he was, very sick with another problem called an adenovirus. Adenoviruses are in a lot of our bodies, but our immune systems normally kill them. But if we don't have a good immune system, and he didn't because we had to kill his because of the cancer that was in his bone marrow, he wound up getting the adenovirus started to attack his kidney. So this is a very nasty virus that will do great harm if you don't get rid of it. And Josh had this problem in a big time way. Any of you remember Josh Hardy? Okay, a few of you do. So treatment was started to kill this virus. It used a medicine called Ph.D, but it had to be halted because, of course, the drug had adverse effects on his kidneys. So we're trying to kill this thing before it kills his kidneys. The drug is nephrotoxic. It's killing his kidney function too. So one of the side effects of a new drug. His doctors at St. Jude said, we heard of a drug in the literature called brincidofovir. It is in a phase 3 study. What's that? Effectiveness, seeing whether it works. For a different condition, herpes. There's good news for all of you in the room. Seeing if you're awake here. So that was made by a company called Chimerix, the drug brincidofovir. A little drug company. When I say little, I mean 26 employees. Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. To think of this company, you might think it had a CEO and 25 nerds. That's who worked there. There's no lawyer, there's no PR person, there's nobody there but a bunch of bench scientists, and one CEO tries to raise money. That's how a lot of these companies work. The startups, the little startups. And they go to investors and say, would you like to put a couple $1,000,000 in our company? We think we have a promising drug. And the investors say, yeah, but you better show us some return in 2 years or 3 years, or that's it, no more money, and the thing falls apart. I didn't ask you this, but I'll ask you this here. From animals to the pharmacy shelf, going through the process, what do you think the odds are of a drug making it? 1 in 100. So most things don't work. The reason I knew there wasn't much in Mexico, despite the Dallas Buyers Club, is research is really hard. If it was easy, we'd get rid of a lot more diseases. It's hard. We don't know enough to really say just because this drug's looking good in animals that it's going anywhere in us. So it's a long shot. And this company was getting close to something useful and money-making for its investors and its employees. However, they also knew that herpes is a virus, and this drug had shown some potency against other viruses, and it didn't hurt your kidney. So the doctors at St. Jude's had read about the drug, and they knew that. In fact, this company, Chimerix, had tried the drug against adenovirus. And everything interconnects here. You'll love this. Anybody here a conspiracy theorist? Well, this is good fodder for you. You'll like this. Why do we have this company getting funded to study this weirdo drug? I told you that the adenoviruses and the diseases involved here are all pretty rare. The federal government put money into this drug as an anti-smallpox drug for terrorism attack. That's why it exists. It was funded by the Department of Defense in case people were worried about smallpox being used as a weapon. That's another virus. This drug has a broad antiviral spectrum. So the company was living off of Defense Department money. It wasn't a secret, but it wasn't exactly front page news either. So Chimerix, when the federal government money ran out, shut down all the trials and went after herpes because that's where the big market is, as everybody in this room understands. So the doctor said, let's go to Chimerix and request compassionate use for a different indication, kill the adenovirus, for brincidofovir, for Josh Hardy. And they approached the company, and the company said, no, we're not giving you that drug. We did test it, and we did see some potency against adenovirus, but we don't have any money. There's 25 of us here. We aren't ready to put it in a box and ship it to you. We're not doctors. We're just a company. We're not going to do it. So they denied the request. Hardy's kidneys began to fail. The physicians at St. Jude made another request, and in fact, the CEO of the hospital got into this and said, please, he's going to die. If you don't get him a non-nephrotoxic, meaning something that doesn't kill his kidneys, medication with some efficacy that company has worked, he's going to go. That request denied. Now, for those of you thinking about this, remember, you're a little company, you're getting pretty close to getting this thing approved, and I have to remind you, if you get it approved, then Josh Hardy of the future can get it because a doctor can prescribe an approved drug for anything. If you get it approved for one thing, it's good for whatever the doctor wants. Josh Hardy might die, but if they can push this thing through to approval, anybody who had the same situation as Josh down the road could get the drug. I mean, presuming they could pay for it or whatever they were going to charge for it, but it would be available. If you don't do that, every future Josh Hardy is waiting to get compassionate access. And the company's saying, how are we going to get this thing approved? There's 25 of us, we got to finish the study. And we can't divert the resources. And there's one other little group in the background, the investors. The free market investors, the rich guys. And they're saying, finish the trial, make us the money, do not give the drug away to little Josh. That isn't the road. We're not a charity, we're business. Drug development is a business. Investors invest in chimerics type companies because they want returns. They don't invest in Pfizer or AstraZeneca because they want big returns fast. And if you say to them, I'm going to give your drug away to every little kid who asks, guess what they're going to say? No more money for you. So that pressure's on in the background. It's not that the company has no heart. They're weighing all these things as they go along and saying, can't do it. Well, Amy Hardy was Josh's mom, and she wasn't going to take no for an answer, and she is a pretty smart and intelligent person. And she posted up on her Facebook page asking if anybody knew someone at Chimerics, the company, or their board of investors who might change their minds. And this is all happening in real time. This is day by day now. This is one day after another I'm talking to you, because Josh is really leaving us. Within hours, people off the Facebook site started to email Chimerics and say, please save Josh. At that point, Josh Hardy's uncle set up his own Facebook page and a Twitter site that became #SaveJosh. And #SaveJosh put up as its first post the second request from the doctors at St. Jude's to save little Josh by giving him the drug. That's his mother, that's his brothers. This picture was taken before he got so sick that we saw him in the ICU earlier. But clearly, a very nice picture, a family that would appeal to a lot of folks. If I showed you a picture of a 7-year-old who was dying of Parkinson's disease, maybe not so moving, right? But this kid, he's cute. We saw what he looked like before. His mom, his family are great. The media saw the explosion of interest on the Twitter sites and the Facebook pages, and they got on the story. That's his mom on Fox News. That's the headline, drug company refuses to help 7-year-old boy. They didn't use the very sick picture. They used an earlier one where he looks more appealing. And so, to put it mildly, last summer, just before Ebola came to us in a big way, this was the news of the day, 24/7 on every cable channel and outlet. You could have seen me on TV talking about this case. Lots of media attention was building to save Josh. In fact, a charity was formed that offered to pay whatever the cost was of getting Josh the brincenofovir drug made by Chimerics, and still the company said no. Now, in fact, part of the reason they said no is cost wasn't the issue for them. What was the issue for them was getting fast approval. It didn't cost them that much for this particular drug. They had a lot of it. And I should add, in some cases, when somebody wants compassionate use of a drug, the entire world's supply is this. And were you to give it, you have nothing left for a trial until you make more of it. Because companies, when they're making a lot of drugs, don't make a lot of it because they don't know if it's going to work. They make enough to put it in a trial. Brincenofovir, there was a lot of it because the government had sponsored it for those smallpox studies, and they built a big reservoir of the drug that had a lot of it. But a lot of the time, you don't. When somebody says, give it to me, you give it to them, that's the end of it. There is no more drug. They're not getting it approved until they make more drug. If you give it away, and the investors say, you did what? You just gave away this supply of drug? We're not investing in you anymore. So you got some things to be thinking about. It isn't just compassion for the immediate kid in front of you. You're trying to think, where are we going with our drug as a company? And if we could get the damn drug approved, We could save a lot more people that way. By the way, that happy guy down there is the CEO of Chimerix, Ken Mock. He didn't have it so well because pretty soon things went nasty. He got a lot of death threats. You might say, well, people get death threats. I get a lot of death threats. I don't take them seriously. Who the hell actually wants to kill me? What good is it? But him, they wanted something from him. And the FBI took it seriously. They moved him into a secret location. They moved the entire board of the company into secret locations. Security was everywhere, and these guys were freaking out. And that picture began to dominate the news of Josh. Not the one where we saw him very sick. This was Josh, help him. About this time, I got a phone call from Ken Mock saying, we're in a jam and give us some advice, which I will tell you about in a second. The attempt was to say, give us the drug. I didn't tell you this, but there's one other problem you face if you have a new drug. If I give it to Josh, and Josh takes my drug, and then Josh dies, what's going to happen to the standing of my drug at the FDA? Nothing good. Because they're going to say, did the drug kill Josh? Even though Josh was almost dead, did the drug do it? Well, I'm going to have to take the time to explain, did the drug do it or not? I may not even know whether the drug did it because Josh was so sick that I can't really tell whether there was a bad effect from the drug or Josh just died because he had this crazy virus that was killing his kidneys. Companies, when they get approached about compassionate use, often will not give their drug because they don't want the FDA coming down on them to say, explain why this person died. And most of the people asking, or not most, many of the people asking are terminally ill, so the chance of them dying is pretty darn good. So, what to do? I talked with Mock and I said, look, I've been down this path before as I have with some other situations, and I said there may be a road here where we can get this to happen without putting your drug in jeopardy. Instead of saying we're just going to send the drug to St. Jude's, maybe the FDA would let us run a mini trial, a study of adenovirus in kids like Josh, give it to, say, 10 kids, make Josh the first subject, and if he dies, it'll mean that the drug has a problem for adenovirus, but it doesn't impact the herpes use. So it's isolating it or firewalling it. And that is ultimately what happened. We got the drug to Josh by creating a special pathway through the regulator that protected the drug from having to deal with an adverse consequence. Everybody follow that? So there was a way to do it without them jeopardizing the drug's future approval and marketability. Now, I told you about the Dallas Buyers Club in the ancient days of AIDS. In my life, I've been involved with easily 100 Joshes and requests for drugs, sometimes from individuals, sometimes from people who are a class of people who have HIV. I'm going to tell you, in my experience, no one ever got better. Remember I told you it's 1 in 100 to get from animals to the end. You're really up against long odds. And having approved many compassionate use drugs, no one ever got better. He got better. He's still alive. He's home. The drug seems to have knocked the virus out. And he's happy. He just had a little press conference to talk about his situation. He's still in trouble. The underlying kidney cancer isn't gone, and he's got other complications. But much to my amazement, the drug worked. I've never seen it. Never seen it in my life. And there he was. By the way, every patient group in America who fights for people with Alzheimer's, MS, Parkinsonism, multiple muscular dystrophy, you name it, they all know about Josh. They all know he got better. In the past year, there's been a 92% increase in requests for compassionate use, and it's going to go up some more. We'll come back to that too. So, in the spirit of no good deed goes unpunished, he was fired. He was fired because the company thought, you really shouldn't have got us into, I should preface this, I believe he was fired because I don't have any insider knowledge, but I believe the company thought you put us at risk, we had to have security, we didn't sign up for any of this, this was mishandled, whether the kid got the drug or not, we didn't care, and you are gone. So he is unemployed as of now. It's been about almost 9 months, I guess. And the company, you'll be pleased to know, if you want to buy it, Chimeric stock, is doing great. They wrote up the adenovirus infection and presented in meetings. Josh did well. The stock, this is a stock report, up 4.5%, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, company goes on and is doing very, very well. And I probably should just stop the talk here and say, well, you know, there you go. Figure it out. But we'll plod on. So how do you get unapproved drugs? You've heard the story of Josh now. One is to have the right knowledgeable doctors, resources, and contacts. Or to put this another way, Josh was at St. Jude's Hospital where people read the literature. What would happen to Josh if he was in Camden, New Jersey at the public clinic? Nobody would have read this literature. Nobody would know what the hell happened to Josh. He would have just died. Having connections makes a huge difference in getting access to emergency drugs, unapproved drugs, compassionate use. You have to know how to approach a pharmaceutical company. The mom organized a Twitter campaign. The mom organized a Facebook campaign. There are plenty of families that don't want to do that or don't know how to do that. They don't get fair treatment if the game is whoever can yell loudly can get our attention. Also, in addition to yelling loudly, Josh was a cute kid. There are plenty of not cute people, and I know a number of those, who want drugs. They don't get anybody's attention in the media. They don't access anything. Nobody cares about them. Some of them are real pains in the asses, by the way, so nobody even wants to deal with them. The first word out of their mouth is, if you don't give me this, I'll sue you, and the company just walks away. They don't answer anything more. End of story. Done. And you might, in some instances, be able to get access to a drug by joining a clinical trial if there is one of those phase 3 studies. But remember, in many of those, 50% you're going to be on placebo. So you can get access sometimes to unapproved things if there's a trial running, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get the drug. It just gives you a chance. So the social media thing worked, and that's great. By the way, any of you interested in journalism? Few. So the other fact about this is, how many Josh Hardy stories are you going to do before your editor or producer says, we're done with those, what else you got? And the answer is about 2 per year. You're never coming back to this. And if you go on the internet and see sites that say, please help me, how many are you going to read? 1, 2. You're certainly not going to read the dozens that are up there, and they're up there all the time. So what I'm getting at is, this mode of accessing compassionate use is unfair, unjust. It can't be utilized by many people. If you're not a cute little kid, you're probably not going to get anywhere that way. Put aside issues of what race you are, what economic class you are, whether you're an illegal immigrant, imagine that website. These days, I don't think you'd be getting far. But put all that aside, just the fact is that's not a really good system for this problem. If you wanted to find out what clinical trials you could get into, the government maintains a website. You don't have to try to read it, and hope you never do, because it's complicated and murky, but it does tell you trials that are going on. The problem with that website is it's out of date, and it doesn't really have accurate, up-to-date information. So you may think there's a trial you could get into for something, and it turns out the trial ended 6 months ago, but no one pulled it off the website yet. It's just a mishmash of information. Another thing that people think is it's the FDA that's in the way. That was the theme in the Dallas Buyers Club movie. Remember that? FDA won't let us get these drugs. FDA is some kind of bunch of pointy heads who don't care about dying children like Josh Hardy. Although remember, we did work with the FDA to get Josh Hardy into a special trial to get him the drug. There are a lot of folks, particularly more libertarian-leaning folks, who want to get rid of the FDA entirely. But certainly many of them would say, if you're dying, you should have access to whatever you want to take, whether it was made in the bathtub, given to the cat who seemed to do better, whatever it is, you should be able to get it. However, this is the FDA request list because they get asked for expanded access. And here's an interesting number. 1,882 requests came to them last year. They approved 1,873. If they're in the way, they're not a lot in the way. So if you can find them and ask them, which most people can't, but if you can, they're likely to say, we'll work with you. Still, a lot of folks think, and this is where we get to the government actions trying to resolve this tough ethics and healthcare problem, that the thing to do is to get rid of the FDA, speed up the process, and let people get what they want. And this law, passed last year, is called a right to try law. It allows terminally ill patients to have access to investigational products, meaning not yet approved, that have been through phase 1 studies. If they've gotten to that phase 1 point, this law says no matter what the FDA says about having to go to phase 2 and phase 3, you can get them whatever it is now. So that is a state, Colorado, trying to help and do the right thing by Joshes of the world. The idea is catching on. Michigan, Missouri, Louisiana, Colorado, and Arizona by ballot, have passed right to try laws just in the past 9 months. It actually is spreading like wildfire. Virginia just passed the legislature today. It's gone to the governor today. New Jersey has a bill in, although I don't know its status right now, but there is one submitted. That's the blue states. So this is wildfire spreading across the country. States saying the resolution of the problem of kids like Josh Hardy is to say to the FDA, no more phase 2, no more phase 3, don't care about clinical trials. If you're terminally ill, you should be able to get drug. So how many of you think that's a good idea? Nobody? Somebody's passing these laws out there. Well, a lot of folks do, but I don't. So there are 31 states that have them proposed or enacted right now. And as I told you, requests are going up for desperately ill people to get drug. Not only that, companies are being formed to help people do what they did in the Dallas Buyers Club. You pay me a fee of $25,000, I'll put together a social media campaign for you and help you get a drug if you're dying. This one is called My Tomorrows, optimistic. So they're out there too. And they work internationally as well, not just in the US. Actually, that's a British company that's coming here. Federal legislation, kind of involving the idea of right to try, is also rattling around right now in Congress. That's all that says. So what do? They say you can ask a pharmaceutical company for access to an unapproved treatment if you're terminal. You have a doctor saying that I agree that you should be able to do this, and the treatment has at least got through the initial 20-person or so safety study. That's what they do. What don't they do? This is the craziest thing of all. They don't tell a company that they have to give you the drug. They say there's a right to the drug. Okay. I describe these laws, and remember, they're moving all through the country at hyperspeed. I've never seen legislation go so fast. I call them right to beg laws. Because Chimerix doesn't have to give you the drug. You have the right to go ask the company to give you the drug. Well, guess what? You had that right anyway. That's how Josh Hardy got his drug. There's nothing here, there's no right unless someone has an obligation to fulfill it. It's empty. They don't give you any money. What if the company said, well, we got this much drug, and if you want it, it's $100,000, because that's all we got, and we got to replace it. There's nothing in the right to try law that budgets anything. And I might add something else, just to depress you completely, if you're not already. So we had, what, a year and a half, 2 years of argument about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare? And how often did we all discuss compassionate use and who's going to pay for it? To which the answer is never, ever. We talked a lot about websites. Websites? Really? Like, they're not going to fix the website? Nothing here. Josh Hardy was in St. Jude's Hospital. I don't know if I mentioned this, but he's from Virginia. What if you need a drug for your kid and you live in Trenton? How are you getting to St. Jude's Hospital? You gonna walk there? Do you need a babysitter? Who's paying for your hotel? Who's feeding you? Who's taking care of the dog? What are you doing with the other kids in the family while you're away? No money. Nothing. Right to try. I'm for that. No money. No lodging, no nothing. To me, these are, I'm trying to say this politely at the Eagleton Institute, stupid, vague, vaporous, ridiculous laws. They're just crummy. They make you think you're going to get something they don't give you anything. And yet, states are passing them left and right. They also have one other interesting feature. Can a state step forward and say, we don't care what the FDA wants, we're going to do it our way? Well, actually, no. For those of you who are lawyers or going to law school, it's called preemption. The federal government preempts the states when it comes to interstate commerce. You can't say, hey, you want drugs after phase 1? Go get them. It's clearly unconstitutional. It's never going to hold up to a challenge. Although that doesn't bother me as much because the laws don't do anything anyway. I'd feel worse if they did something. They have some other crazy features just to let you really sink your teeth into compassionate use. They only apply to terminally ill patients. How do you define terminal illness? It's an old chestnut. Those of you interested in a different issue, assisted suicide, right to die, aid in dying. Some of you know about that debate. It's in New Jersey too. Just had a lawsuit in New York. Just had Vermont pass it. Well, those laws trigger by a definition of terminal illness. Oftentimes, 6 months to live. Are we good at predicting who's got 6 months to live? Not great. 2 doctors have to say you've got terminal illness. Is it an allergist and a dermatologist? Could be. There's no real, just as a doctor, as the law does, the right to try law says, a doctor has to say you need this. By the way, there are plenty of doctors around who are trying to rip off dying people and would, in fact, empty their pockets chasing false hope. So I'm not persuaded that having a doctor, some doctors say you need it, is enough screening. I'm a little more comfortable if the FDA says we looked at it and we're going to approve it. And remember, about 98% of the time they did. People who are dying are not the only people who want compassionate use. If you're having the early stages of Alzheimer's, you're pretty interested in compassionate use. Any of you see that movie Still Alice? So she knows she's going, and she knows she's not going to be able to be competent, and do you think she wouldn't want to try some drugs that look promising? I can actually tell you this. I've had people ask me for compassionate use for Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, migraines. If you're suffering, you don't have to be dying to want to get access to a drug. And this law only applies to the terminally ill. The vast majority of people looking for early access compassionate use are not dying. The majority of people that I've been involved with had something else, MS, Parkinson's disease, but they weren't going to die in 6 months. So the law isn't actually capturing the demand issue. If you are dying, many of you these days might choose to die in a hospice. Anybody know what the rules are of hospice about trying treatments? Can't do it. To enter hospice in the US and get the hospice benefit, you have to agree to forego treatments and just accept pain control and support. It's called palliative care. If you try one of these drugs, you're going to lose your hospice benefit. There's no protection. In fact, the laws not only don't do anything, they're worse. They put you at risk, if you are dying, of losing access to hospice. So, I think that this is an example, for those of you going into politics or policy, of how to completely miss the mark on a very, very tough issue. What are we going to do with desperately ill people who want something that they can't get and are looking for mercy and compassion? The way the legislature has responded is to do it very poorly. How far am I to question time here? I didn't mean to wake you up, I'm sorry.
We're good when you're ready, Dr. Caplan. We're ready for questions when you are.
Okay, well, I won't be ready, because like Fidel Castro, I have a lot to say. But I'll start to wrap it up going in this direction. Without more slides, I'll just take it this way. So remember, I've told you there is a big need out there for compassionate use. I believe ethically, we do owe it to people to try and give them some shot at life or some relief when they can't get in a trial, when they can't avail themselves of a media campaign, when they're not rich or connected or cute. We should come up with a system that's better. The solution that we've arrived at, the right to try laws, are not the answer. They don't give you anything, they don't help you, they hurt you. In fact, if you really are terminally ill, they'll probably make you worse off. In the Ebola campaign, we gave drug freely to a lot of folks who made it here. We didn't give it to people in Africa, and that is a justice issue. But it seems to me we did accept the idea that we're going to take some gambles. For the dying, we'll try to learn what we can from them, but I think the FDA should basically say if we do compassionate use, it's off limits in terms of positive effects or negative effects. You can't use it in your drug application. I mean, you can use it. Josh Hardy going home is certainly not going to be a secret, but it shouldn't be relevant one way or the other. It should be a side path in drug development. I think we have to set limits on how often you're going to get to do compassion, because each one of us is the answer to the compassionate use question. And what I mean by that is, how much do you want to spend on it? Because if you don't budget it, there won't be compassionate use. There'll just be begging. So while it sounds like a big issue for legislators and governors and Congress and presidents, if we don't say to them, we want a compassionate use program and we think you should hold 2% of the budget every year of the healthcare system to pay for compassionate use, then there isn't going to be anything but begging. So how much? Well, most of this stuff doesn't work. Josh went home. That's good. And most of the time it doesn't work. I do care if my grandchildren get drugs that have been tested. I'm not going to spend the whole budget on Josh. I am going to spend something. Probably 1 or 2% of the budget is where I would go, and after that, you're not going to have any more. How much compassion do you show in the charities you give? Do you give away 100% of your money like Peter Singer, the Princeton philosopher, thinks you might? Do you give 10%? 2%? It's the same issue here. What do you want to do for people who are desperate? How much do you want to spend on them? And I don't think we're going to spend 80% of our household budget on charity. But we might spend a couple percent on charity, and then charity's over, and that's all we can do. So there will be Joshes in my world who don't get help. But there are going to be some Joshes who do get help. And we're going to have to draw the line on how much money to spend on helping Joshes. If you don't want to get into that issue and you want politicians in Washington to continue to talk about websites, then you're going to have begging. And the rich will do better than the poor, and that will be how it sorts out. And by the way, the early beggars will do better than the later beggars because our compassion wears out. So we're not going to pay attention to whoever it is at the end. They're not going to get our help. A special track to isolate the results. Don't count them pro or con the drug. Incentivize companies to make a little more drug initially to use for compassion. That might be a way to spend some money. Help people pay the costs. Put some money in the budget for travel. That might make some sense. Decide how much you want to do for charity for the desperate, and then you hit your limit. If the money's all gone that year, Josh dies. I don't see any other way around it. I don't want to hijack the whole budget into paying for desperate long shots. We've got to still go through the process of approving things. I'm going to say it again. I want my grandchildren to have safe and effective drugs. We can't always guarantee that, but we certainly should be trying, and I think that's something we have to care about. The same principles are going to apply internationally. We're not going to give everybody in Liberia ZMapp. That was another drug that was tested, and ZMapp did fit into the category of, at one point in the world, that was the entire supply of ZMapp. The fact that American doctors got it who came back here is no surprise. If you have this much, you're going to treat your own first. It's probably not even a bad moral principle. But at some point you have to say, let's make some ZMapp and maybe try it on a few people in a poor country. How many? I don't know. It's up to us. We can argue it. The other thing I know about Ebola is ZMapp didn't do as much good as teaching people to wash their hands, how to bury dead people, how to isolate people who are infectious, and probably how to get water into them so they didn't die of dehydration, which is probably why people here got better. So I don't want to spend my whole budget in Sierra Leone on experimental drugs. I'll spend a little, but I think trying to upgrade their hospital system is the best way to go in the long run to help people with Ebola, now and in the future. So compassion is a tricky thing. I recognize it. When we see it on TV, it's very moving. Who could say no to Josh and his mom? Politicians don't want to go there. They're passing feel-good legislation, the right to try. Great. Even on a bad day, that's a bad law. Substitute it in. Whose fault is that? It's ours. The legislatures are whipping through these things. Governors are standing there and saying, I'm proud to give people the right to try. We applaud, say, well, you're very thoughtful there, Governor. Thank you. I'll begin my begging tomorrow. We have to decide what we want to put into charity. We have to decide how compassionate we want to be. We have to decide what the budget should look like, where the expense money is going to go, how we're going to help both the poor and the unattractive play ball here as well as the well-off and the cute. That's the challenge. I'll leave it up to you to decide where the answer is. Thank you. So the way this works is we've got a mic out there. You are allowed to offer some praise. Or you could ask a question.
Dr. Caplan, I'll defer to questions that you might want to take. If we could start with students first. And
Yeah.
I would ask you, everyone, to please just introduce yourself. Let us know if you're affiliated with Rutgers in some way. We are recording for our YouTube channel tonight, and we'd just like to let everybody know who's in the conversation.
Somebody had a hand up over here. There they are. There's one.
Can I not use the microphone?
Sure, I can repeat it.
Yeah. Okay, so my name is Tatiana, and I'm here I'm a Ph.D. student at the neuroscience program here. And I'm just curious how countries, for example, like the UK, within NHS, how do they deal with these compassionate use issues?
So the question is from Tatiana, who's a PhD student here in neuroscience. Pretty good, huh? How do other countries deal with compassionate use? No better than us. We've been collecting information back at NYU. I started a little working group there on compassionate use. We've been getting policies. Basically, they leave it up to the private company to make the answer as to whether they're going to give the drug or not. It's no better than it is here. We've looked at countries like Turkey, the UK, Singapore, rich ones, poor ones. No one really has a policy in place. They love to say, when you call a politician, I will help you. And most of them will call their government official and say, please give Johnny the drug, but that's the end of it. They don't push on further. So it's not like we're worse, but we're certainly not better. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I'm Sandy Efron. I'm not a student at Rutgers, hard to believe. My question is one of ethics with respect to mandatory vaccinations. Is there any science or any reason other than immunity that the kid may have for not requiring everybody to have their children being vaccinated? Why, someone says, I don't want to, what are the ethics behind that? Thank you.
So next year, when I come back, we can do vaccines. Sandy, I think it was, who's a lifelong learner, clearly. That's an old guy to old guy joke there. Basically the public policy side around mandates of anything, whether it's vaccination, or child seats, or seat belts. We have certain things where we don't say, look, we have child seats. It's up to you to decide whether you want to put your kid in it. You don't want to, up to you. We don't allow that. We mandate them. We fine you if we see you riding around without one. I guess we've stumbled toward that with seat belts. You can get stopped and fined if you don't wear one. We certainly have mandates that say the cops can pull you over and make you blow for alcohol use to see if you're driving impaired. We hold families responsible for serving drinks to teenagers. If they go out and hurt somebody, it's the bar or the parents who are going to be responsible. So I go through this to say, look, we have mandates at some areas of our lives for public health purposes. Sometimes they're for kids. We may go the extra mile with a child seat or something like that. I've certainly been in situations where somebody called me up and said, it looks like a child is dying from diabetes. They need insulin. The parents say no, they want to pray. And I've said, we're going to court. And we're going to force it over the parental refusal. So I don't think you should be in a situation where you allow your child to die when there's a proven therapeutic intervention. The difference with vaccines is they're preventative. And part of the arguments about mandates has to do with, does it protect others? People in the audience know, some of you know, I'm a pretty strong pro-vaccine person. I believe in mandates. I push for them. But I also do believe there should be exemptions. There are people who take them on health grounds. And I think you might even have them just for somebody who wants to say, I don't want one. But I'd like you to get educated. I'd like you to listen to the best case possible before you do that. I don't want you to just check a box and run away. New Jersey, for example, has religious exemptions. There is no religion that opposes vaccination, not one. You're thinking, well, don't Christian Scientists? No, they don't. Don't the Amish? No, they're a little indifferent to vaccination, but they don't doctrinally oppose it. There's no religion. Most religions say, Catholic Church, get vaccinated to help the community. Get vaccinated to protect kids. So you could still build a release valve, but it shouldn't be so broad that you could drive a truck through it. That's where I get upset. Why am I so strong on vaccines? I'll end this answer with a personal comment. When I was 5, I had polio. I know what an epidemic does. I was paralyzed for a long time. I watched a lot of kids die in iron lungs. I know what vaccine safety and vaccine unsafety mean. I watched it. I've been to Africa. I know people there would say, an Ebola vaccine? I want one tomorrow morning. I got an 80% death rate going on around me. So I get the force of it. I understand it, but that's how I would answer it. Let some people go, but let's try to discourage it a bit.
Is there any science? Is there any science that says, gee, I'm smart not to get a vaccine?
Well, you know where I stand. I'll just tell you tonight. I'm with the American Association of Pediatrics. I'm with the WHO. I'm with UNICEF. I'm with the AMA. I'm with the science organizations that say the science supports vaccination. Now, I know there are other people who say they see dangers. There's certainly been fears over the years about autism and other things. I don't think the science supports any of that. Forget what I say. Your pediatrician, who's the person I trust the most, the AAP, says, vaccinate. That's about as good as I can do on the science. Yeah.
I think we have a student question. in the
Oh,
back
student
here
here,
as well.
okay, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm a senior at Rutgers. Math and computer science, not this stuff, but it's pretty cool. So I've got two questions. The first one's a little bit smaller, so hopefully it won't take like 15 minutes to answer.
I'll take that critique, go on.
I want to prevent other people from...
Actually, you come from computer science, so everything's done in 4 seconds. What do you know? It's a yes or a no.
So my first question is for the right to, what's it, right to try, or whatever?
Yes.
So those laws, when they say the have to be dying, the terminal part of it, if the drugs have already cleared stage 1, aren't they supposed to be safe? And does the fact that that's in there maybe reflect like a little bit of a misunderstanding on the part of legislators?
So quickly on that one, it is a safety study in phase 1, but remember, it's healthy volunteers, so it's a very narrow sense of safety. What you really want to do is get it up to the phase 3 level and watch for side effects in the sick population that's going to get it. If I take 20 guys like you and give them a drug and nothing happens, that doesn't mean in an old geezer like me nothing's going to happen. So that's what the difference is.
Okay. So that kind of messes with the lead into my second question a little bit, because I assumed that there was like a misunderstanding. So my next question is, you as like an expert in this field, are you
I wouldn't say like an expert.
As an expert in this field,
Better.
do you have like the position or authority or whatever to like have direct contact with lawmakers? If you do or if you don't, do you feel like you have an obligation to speak directly with them, or do you just feel like doing events like this is where it ends?
Well, knowing that most of our future legislators are in this room coming from Rutgers, this is as good as I can get. No, I actually, I do feel that academics should interact with the public policy people. I do it as much as I can, as much as they'll listen. I write for newspapers and try to appear on TV to try and not just get you all interested, but to make the legislators pay attention too. I will tell you one little story you'll like. A couple years ago, I got on TV because Michelle Bachmann said that she had met somebody who'd become mentally retarded, her words, from the HPV vaccine. And I said, I'll pay you $10,000 if you can produce the person. And she didn't. And that was the end of her presidential campaign. So you can influence legislators. I think the trick here is you've got to come ready. They're busy. They got a few minutes. I wouldn't give them that slideshow, but I might say, the hospice benefit, you didn't budget any money. You can do better in terms of trying to help people with their expenses. It's got to be a tight, compact message, because you don't get an hour to really tell them their story. But yes, and I think more people in professor roles should do it. I'm a little ashamed that we don't. And even if people who disagree with me want to go out and do it, well, great. That can only help the debate. And while you've got me ranting, even though I promise not to do this, given the level of medical and scientific understanding that our legislators have, it wouldn't hurt for anybody to talk to them. I mean, it would be good to have more. So I think we don't do ourselves a service if we don't get in there and fight some of this stuff out, take it out of the ivory tower. I mean, I'm ready. I think in the intro somebody said, he's written 600 articles in journals. I'm sure 1 or 2 of them got read by somebody, I think. But this is the action part of make it, in your terms, it's translational research. Take it out there and show an impact with it. I think we're doing students here, so I apologize. Yeah.
Well, my name is Michael. I was wondering if the right to try also includes the opportunity to try experimental operations, or is it only experimental drugs?
It's a great question. Surgeries, if they don't involve new devices, are not subject to the FDA approval process. So they don't even come through it. Your surgeon could say, I've always done a C-section, well, not your surgeon, but a surgeon who's working on women could say, I've always done C-sections this way, cut this way, but I'm going to cut it a little different this way because I think that would be better, and they wouldn't have to go to the FDA to do it. So there's more freedom, which attracts some people to surgery as opposed to drug development sometimes or other things. They don't have to go through the same approval. It's all linked to drugs, devices, vaccines, or a new biological product like a stem cell. That's where the regulatory kicker is. Everything else, you can tie the knot a little differently if it's the same old string.
Hi, my name is Ethan Anderson. I'm a senior at Rutgers and I'm a field organizer with Compassionate Choices, working on the Aid and Dying for the Terminally Ill Act here in New Jersey. I know you don't like how the government has involved itself with the right to try laws. I'm curious of your stance on the government's involvement or non-involvement with the death with dignity issue.
Well, the year after when I come back, we can talk about that issue. I think government has to have a role in this, right, to try. I just think it's got the wrong role. It should be funding, it should be trying to figure out how to make a budget, maybe vet things. You know, I gave it to the cat, and the cat looks better isn't sort of where I'm at in terms of saying, yeah, let's try that on Josh. But there is a role for government, and I think there's a role for government in aid and dying too. I've moved my own position when assisted suicide, aid and dying, and these terms are used depending on whether you're for it or against it, was first put forward. I testified in the trial of Jack Kevorkian against it. I said that Jack Kevorkian was not, he didn't know the people he was helping to die. Many of the people he helped to die were psychiatrically disturbed, and he was kind of too eager. He didn't wait long enough. It was sort of like, Jack, I want to die. Okay, let's go. A little too much enthusiasm there. He also didn't offer people alternatives. He didn't say, well, we could try palliation or put you in a hospice or whatever. He just sort of was, let's do it. I think Oregon and Washington changed my mind. They've worked. They're triggered by terminal illness. They have protections that I think are pretty good. You take the pill, not the doctor killing you. You swallow it. You get a psychiatric evaluation. You wait for a while before you can get the pills after requesting them. Even the fact, interesting enough, in Oregon and Washington, the states that have had legalized aid and dying the longest, about 40% of the people who request pills don't take them. So that tells me they like the security of knowing they could, but they don't. And that means to me, in some ways, this is a little bit of a suicide prevention law, because otherwise people might say, I don't have any assurance that if things get bad, I can't end it, so I'm going to end it and not take the chances. So I do think there's a role for government, and I do think the deaths should be reported and all supervised. But I have changed my view there. I'm more on the let's go with what Oregon and Washington and now Vermont have done. One last comment, sorry about all this, going on too long in a different subject. But there are court cases. New York has one, Montana has one, New Mexico has one. They're very interesting. You go to court and you say, shouldn't there be a right to die in Montana or wherever, New York? And that's fine, but you still then have to come up with what the system's going to be. Just because the Montana Supreme Court says, yes, you can have a right to die, that makes me a little nervous because now there's no rules. They didn't say anything about who, what, where, how, reported, and all that. So ideally, I'd like to see a legislative or a health department sort of a input on this. That was the fastest I could give that speech in the history of humanity. All right, one more over there.
We've got a cluster of 3 questions over here. If you want, I can even do all 3 together.
No, you can do them one after another, and then I'll let you all scram. You can come up if you didn't get to ask one and you still wanted to, although I can't imagine anybody here is not comatose, but go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Garrido. I'm a junior here at Rutgers studying history. And I know you discussed an emphasis on establishing a budget of 1% to 2% to go towards these special cases, but it seems like the media has like a really big role in helping these cases move forward. So what percentage or effort of that budget should go towards encouraging the media to establish more than 1 or 2 stories?
Yeah, well, I think you need a couple things. Good question. One, you need to have social media sites that alert the general public that compassionate use is an option. You need educational efforts with doctors and nurses to say, hey, you know, if you're dying or very sick from something, you might think about compassionate use. We don't train people to consider that option very well. And I think media stories that just said, compassionate use, this is what it is, this is who might use it, here's a case like Josh Hardy, where they're not trying to save the kid and get the glory, but they're trying to inform everybody kids like Josh might benefit from compassionate use. That's all very necessary, because the only way you're really going to chase this is if you know about it, and that's the media's job.
Hi, my name is Joe Melton. My wife works at Eagleton. I've been a scientific consultant for the pharmaceutical industry for about 25 years, and I've watched a lot of things come and go. And the emerging business model that I see right now, which I think is very closely related to what you're talking about, is the whole market for orphan drugs.
Mm-hmm.
There are a whole series of companies that have been set up simply to produce orphan drugs. And as you know, these get through the FDA process in an accelerated fashion. They're given a monopoly. They're given a very free hand in terms of pricing. We now have drugs that treat conditions that affect 2 people in a million worldwide and cost $440,000 a year.
Yep.
They're very effective. Kids live that would not have lived before. But how many of these drugs can we afford to produce? There's thousands of these conditions.
So that's a really good question, and the idea is, remember I was starting off making some wisecracks about personalized and individualized medicine. Well, really the ultra extreme of personalized medicine is to take super rare conditions where you do see a particularly big genetic defect or biochemical defect. You can do something about it because it's not genetically complicated like some tumors, or it's not biologically complicated like a disease like schizophrenia, and go after it. You have a repair. And you charge an arm and a leg for it, partly because you can, and partly because there just aren't that many people who are going to buy your drug. So that model is flourishing, and a lot of medium and small companies are betting on that model and chasing those drugs. It's clear that government is going to have to come in and put some different incentive systems in place. We can't have a country that treats all the rare disorders and doesn't do anything about, you know, major killers. And by the way, the same is true internationally. So it's great that we have, you know, a cure for X here that affects 12 people. We still have Ebola, we still have cholera, we still have malaria, we still have TB, we have HIV, still a problem in a lot of places. So internationally, it's great that the Gates Foundation exists, and I have to tell you, that's it. That's pretty much it for chasing down the big international killers. So justice would say, you have to incentivize this thing differently. The market is not going to give you by itself the right incentives in terms of where the effort's going to go. The market drives you to the big, lucrative, quick, easy ones. I don't mean easy in the sense, but the rare diseases are rare. They give you a little bit better shot at a faster solution. So I think you got to rethink this whole incentive system for the world and for this country. All right, last one.
We have one last student question back here.
Yes, hi. My name is Romel, and I'm a senior, and I'm doing a small project on Ebola. So I know you discussed this earlier, but I just wanted to get your clarification on this. One of the articles that I came about when I was researching about like the vaccine process was that there was a group called GSK, and they're in conjunction with NIH developing a vaccine, and their specific trial is that they are simultaneously going through phase 2 and phase 3. Now, what would you say to people who are against this due to ethical concerns?
It's a funny question for me, because I'm the guy who argued the ethics of going faster. If you look at a journal called The Lancet this week, there's an article by me that will answer your question. About what I think. I think you got to go faster when you're in a situation where you've got a big death rate. Normally we go slow. You don't want the vaccine or the drug to overpower and make more problems than the underlying thing. But in Ebola, still got a huge death rate going on and still got a lot of people impacted. Going faster also means who do you give it to first? The biggest at-risk people are doctors, nurses, and people who deal with dead bodies. because they get the most exposure, so that's your subject population, I think. And then I think you probably are going to do a non-placebo control, try the vaccine out and look for a response against historical rates of disease, not running it against placebo. That's a little less certain, but I'd take it if I could get a bigger result out of the vaccine. So I think ethically, in plagues and huge epidemics that have high lethality, you can't go with a randomized placebo-controlled trial. It's too slow. Now, you could do it once this epidemic calms down, you could study some other things and so forth, but generally speaking, pandemic flu, a huge cholera outbreak in Haiti, Ebola in Africa, you don't really want to be sitting there sort of saying, we'll get you an answer on this vaccine in 7 years. It's just too slow. All right, well, thank you, students. Thank you, everybody. If you want a question, come up here.